What is going on, coin traders and Chainlink Marines? That's right, we are doing Chainlink, Chain Link, Link on that ticker. Looking at a lot of things on this chart, still plenty of good opportunities. Do want to first jump into the weekly chart because we have plenty to talk about. Right now, a little break of structure and unfortunately did set a new lower low on the weekly. So the weekly low that we were looking at before, 12.53.8. So new low came in right now at 11.969. That was on the previous weekly bar that just closed yesterday. So huge magnitude of downside and a lot of lower shadow, showing a little bit of dip buying, still maintaining the closing level of support on top of the 50-period EMA for the weekly. Current weekly still defending that as well. So we are looking at the weekly EMA 50 right now being at 13.493. Now, the 50 is pretty relevant and significant. Obviously, didn't get perfect defenses since we did have a slight break above and obviously on this support. Little slight break below it, but obviously we know that this is one of the most relevant exponential moving averages for this weekly, including this little bit of rejection. So if we can maintain a hold and close on top of it, that actually would be a higher close from the previous weekly, and that still would be a good sign because we know that a lot of lower shadows in these instances are just liquidations and flushes and not necessarily true signs of downside pressure, which is kind of why we focus on closing levels a lot of the time and not necessarily wicks and shadows. Nonetheless, though, we are still looking at over a 100% retracement from this low, but if we actually want to pull up a Fibonacci from the low back in August to the current trend high right now, coming in just over 22, just under 23 right now, then obviously we would be looking at very nice support holding defense of the 61.8. Let me get my drawing tool. 61.8 coming in at 12.28.2. So still a very nice sign, almost barely made a weekly close on top of the 50%. So we could actually see that next leg to the upside, but not necessarily expecting it at that point. Right now, 38.2 is a very nice point of previous level of resistance. So if we do see upside, that is going to be a very relevant point for bulls to get stuck up at. Probably in that instance, that would lead to a little bit more of a head and shoulders type pattern as well, if this level of resistance does hold up. Still plenty of opportunity though, and especially since we have seen overall decrease in volume across the board, we know that a lot of the selling pressure as well as buying pressure has subsided here, but a lot is still hinging on what Bitcoin does here coming up with regard to the halving here in a few days. Now, I want to look at the VPVR volume profile visible range on this weekly chart. So if we do look to the right, below the center point of mass, that kind of came in just above the $15 mark. So since we are above that little bit less areas until we actually get down to about 11.15, anything below that would actually see probably a free fall until we get down into the $10 range where we have a lot of this previous trading. Obviously, a lot of points of previous resistance in that instance. But if we do look to the left here, we do have a little bit of supports from these bounces on the previous move on the last cycle. So this is plenty of opportunity and obviously previous trading action for us to find support, hopefully. But if it does get below that, then likely, like we said, not too much in terms of price action until we get down into the $10 level. So that's kind of why it's another reason why it would be extremely important and beneficial right now for the bulls to be able to maintain closing support on this weekly on top of the 50-period EMA and then actually see another run up to actually test the 1650 and all the way up to about the $17.60 and $18 levels where we saw a lot of previous resistance. So we found previous resistance as well as previous support on this move before the weekly candle saw this huge flush. And unfortunately, we did have that flush and bulls weren't able to defend this level and push prices higher. So now it is going to be that reclaim of those previous levels of support, which now are going to be flipped into resistance. So looking left, these were big levels of resistance that we found, big level of support, as well as big levels of support and resistance. And also, excuse me, before the previous all-time high coming in as that resistive point. So plenty of work for the bulls to do. So we're not necessarily thinking super optimistic vibes just yet in terms of price action, especially with a lot of the rest of the crypto space looking like a little bit farther pullback as well. Technical indicators on the weekly, looking at RSI, relative strength index, saw our high and then our lower high for the weekly chart here. So higher highs in price, lower highs in RSI, getting that bearish divergence. So we know that this is a normal pullback that we have been expecting. Obviously a little bit lower and farther than we would have liked, but because RSI now is so low, currently we're looking at 44.68. So plenty of room to actually see a regain and another upside move, especially with stochastic RSI below the 20 line, looking like we could see a bullish cross here soon. So every time we actually have seen stochastic RSI this low, we actually have gotten over about the following month or two a little bit more of that upside action, which has led to an increase in price. So flipping back over into the daily chart now for Chainlink, and the big thing we're looking at is a defense of a closing level of support. Now, like we mentioned, we did actually get a new lower low compared to our previous trend low at 12,538. So the current low right now, like we said, 11,969. So it did make a new price lower low compared to the previous trend, but overall, we're still defending a very nice level of closing support. So close for that, we're actually looking at 1316 compared to the current candle right now. Anyway, we're looking at 1331, so barely seeing that. And obviously with about an hour and 15 left, we would have a little bit to defend, and hopefully we can't slip below that 1317 level for that close here. Now, with that said, we're also going to be looking at a very big level of closing resistance, and in fact, it does correlate to a pretty big downtrend line, not necessarily the steepest slope on it, but obviously we saw what previous levels of resistance it was, and now we did see it as a level of support, as well as currently on the current candle resistance as well. So right now on the current candle, looking at about 1450, and obviously it would slope down from there. So we do need to break above that trend line and actually reclaim it before seeing prices get back to the upside. So while we're looking at that, we need to see either a confirmation bullish break on top of the trend line, or that would actually start to squeeze the price down towards this price level support at 1317. So that would start to form a descending triangle, and actually likely in that instance, it would lead to a most likely bearish breakout in that instance of that. So initial direction of travel heading into that would be bearish, and that's why we do think that likely, unless we actually break bullish from this trend line, price action would actually be bearish and favor the bearish action, especially after losing and forming kind of a shorter term daily downtrend. Now, got to pull up the technicals, the RSI, because right now we have seen the daily get overextended into the oversold level, and obviously with bullish action, this is much more relevant indication of it being oversold than if we were in a bear market, for example. Combine this with the fact that we have been sitting pretty much at the bottom right around the 20 line for stochastic RSI, we know that these do favor a lot more bullish pressure to the upside. So if we actually zoom out and look at the last time we were looking at oversold conditions, especially this much, and so we were looking at a close for the RSI of 23.34. So even in this instance, back in June of last year in 2023, we're looking at 24.75. So we're actually saw a close of a lower RSI compared to what we saw back then. And then obviously in that instance, you can see we just favored a very nice strong uptrend. So not necessarily to say we're just going to see up and up and up and up from here, but right now that does give a little bit more favoritism towards holding this support a little bit longer anyway, unless we just see a lot of bearish things come out of the rest of crypto, which is entirely possible. Wanted to zoom out a little bit farther before we go ahead and wrap up, because essentially what this does look like to me is after all this accumulation period and perfect level of accumulation here, we are setting up for a very nice Wyckoff accumulation type pattern, which does mean that this pattern right here that we are setting up for essentially is what we call a phase E pattern, which is the very end of this overall pattern before we see an extremely nice breakout on that phase E. So as long as we continue to hold these exponential moving averages, especially after they have flipped bullish in this instance, and back testing both of them, that would be our confirmation of support. And like we saw, we are oversold on the daily time frame and a lot of other time frames as well. So we do have a little bit less than a week on the current 2-week candle, but with all the bearish selling pressure that we saw last week, we're actually not seeing that much selling and bearish volume coming in on this current. So for example, coming off the high here, we actually saw a lot more bearish volume than we have on the current. And obviously we do have, like we said, another week. So we expect this to grow. But based on right now, this isn't necessarily the most amount for 1 week of pullback just yet. And we still are maintaining very nice defense of the 26 and 50 EMAs. And these levels have been pretty relevant on this chart. So if we look left, and specifically, I want to talk about the 50. So we're going to turn off the rest so we can see pretty nice levels of, and obviously these aren't perfect on this chart, pretty nice levels of rejection, even on this candle, basically a little bit of back test, and obviously not perfect as well, but 3 weeks of holding closing support, held closing support, kicked off, and again, 3 weeks of a test. And then even before the current all-time high right now, we had 2 weeks of a test of this 50. So it's very important and a very nice back test right now to be able to hold it. So current level of 50 is 12.28.4. So again, nothing necessarily of suspect, and quite frankly, especially with this much of a pullback and bouncing off of supports, this isn't necessarily the worst option for an entry, especially as we do gear up for a longer phase E breakout, if this is the overall longer term accumulation pattern, which I suspect it is right now. So again, although we have been looking at just a lot of selling pressure lately over the last month or two, we are still looking very nice. And we know that especially since running up since about the fall in October, we were due for a little bit more of a pullback after being just overextended for so far. So not a bad opportunity for any entries and buying the dip if you are dollar cost averaging into any more positions, but otherwise nothing of suspect. Just keep being patient, and we will be providing more updates here frequently on the channel. So if you're not currently subscribed, hit the like and subscribe if you have not done so just yet. But otherwise, that actually is going to go ahead and wrap up the video. Make sure you do post any questions, comments, issues, predictions down below in the comments section. I do love getting back to each and every one of you. Don't forget to drop me a follow over on Twitter or X at coin_trades is the handle over there. Chat with you all soon. And with that, that is going to go ahead and wrap up the video. Appreciate all the love and support, as always does mean so much. Stay safe, take care, and I will catch you back in the next video.